My name is Christopher Roehrig. I'm a senior legal editor on the practical markets, capital markets, and corporate governance team. My primary task every day is just to produce the resources that our subscribers read on a daily basis. I've been at Practical Law for 3.5 years now, and prior to that I spent 10.5 years in practice. I spent almost 7 years at Shearman & Sterling in New York, working in their M&A and capital markets practices. And then I spent the last 3.5 years of my practice at Securities, which is a large Canadian law firm, but I was in their New York office practicing New York law for their Canadian clients. It really revolutionized the way that I practice law. I think one of the major problems in the legal industry is that it's a very a conservative profession that's averse to change, and that's just natural because the way I like to explain it to non-attorneys is that lawyers, everything that we do is focused on not making a mistake, and so we have our way of doing things that we're comfortable with, and we rely on certain resources. And so when something new comes along, it has to be very beneficial for us to change the way that we're doing, because that always creates the possibility that we'll miss something, that there'll be a mistake. And so it's one of the major hurdles in the legal profession, and I think any profession, to the adoption of a new technology or the use of a new platform is giving people the confidence that they can rely on this product and that it will give them the right answer. It was really out of sheer necessity that I found Practical Law. I started using it because I didn't have the army of junior associates to rely on. And the types of transactions that I was working on were very different. So I needed both something that could assist me on a substantive level and something that could make me more efficient and could do the types of tasks that I had traditionally delegated to junior associates. And I quickly realized that Practical Law was the platform that could provide both of those answers. Our subscribers can take each resource and pick and choose how they're going to use that resource. They're full of a lot of links. They're very succinct. There are a lot of bullet points, a lot of white space on the page, and that's really what it's designed to do. Is we're not there to fill up the entire page with text that you have to sift through and to find the answer. We're getting the answer to you as quickly as possible. And that really gets us to the efficiency side of the argument. Once we convince our subscribers that the resources are of a very high quality, which I found when I was in practice, and that the people drafting the resources are very experienced attorneys who've worked on these transactions, you quickly realize the efficiency aspect of Practical Law. So when I started using it, it was initially to answer a few questions on the substantive side on types of transactions that I had never worked on before. But I quickly realized how incredible the resources were and how it could make my practice much more efficient. And so that was much more important when I was at Securities versus Shearman & Sterling, because I didn't have all the army of junior associates working on my transactions. And I think that that's very sort of important in today's environment. I think today, the number of resources available in most law firms and many in-house legal departments is much smaller than it was 10 years ago before the financial crisis. And so I think every attorney, no matter where they are in the profession, is looking for a way to make their practice more efficient. Really, the efficiency gains with Practical Law are sort of exponential. So I used it for 3.5 years at Securities, and I think in the beginning I would log into Practical Law maybe a couple of times a week. By the end I was logging into it a couple of times a day, because I realized I quickly discovered every little nuance and way that you could use the platform to make my practice more efficient. And I know that my productivity increased probably, I don't have a specific metric, but I would say at least 200–300%, because I was doing far more deals with Practical Law with far fewer resources than without Practical Law, but more resources at my disposal, sort of non-Practical Law resources. and this gets into your original question of how our resources are drafted. For example, our standard documents, these are documents that you can just download into Word and just save onto your system and just run with it. You know, it's sort of a general basic agreement or certificate or something like that. And then you just all of the basics are there, and then you tailor it for the specifics of your transaction. And I use that almost immediately. I realized the incredible potential behind that. But by the end, it came up in almost every way. The nature of my practice at the end was very advisory, just providing high-level advice to my clients. And a lot of the time, my clients would send me an email asking me a question. And a lot of my clients at the time were non-US clients, so they weren't very familiar with the US securities laws. And a lot of the questions were very basic. And I knew I could take half an hour and sit there and put together a response very easily, you know, go through it, make sure it was correct, and then send it off and bill my client half an hour. But I knew that I quickly realized that if I went into practical law, I went to the specific practice note, there would be a paragraph in there that a senior legal editor at Practical Law, who was very experienced, had spent a month obsessing about, because that's all we do is draft our resources. And I knew that no matter how great of an attorney I was, in half an hour I couldn't produce a paragraph that was of the same quality that the senior legal editor would produce spending a month just focusing on nothing but that, you know. And that's one of the great things about being a senior legal editor is we don't have conference calls, we don't have clients, we don't have meetings. We just sit there all day long drafting our resources, updating our resources, and making sure that they're maintained. And so instead of taking that half an hour and putting together a response and billing my client a half an hour, I would just copy and paste out of the practice note, put it into the email, and send it off. And I bill my client 1/6 of an hour, or 5 minutes, however long it took. And that had multiple benefits. First of all, the answer that the client got was probably just that little bit better because someone took a month working on it rather than half an hour. It saved my client money, and it meant that I didn't have to spend half an hour sort of regurgitating a very basic response that frankly someone at my level and billing out at my rate shouldn't have been spending half an hour on. I should have been focusing on something more important for my client. It just made my practice more efficient. It made me enjoy the practice of law more because I don't like sitting there spending half an hour regurgitating a basic element of the law. I want to be working on sort of challenging, intellectually stimulating tasks. I always tell people when I'm talking to very junior lawyers, I say, use this product. Obviously, I'm biased because I work here, but if I had that type of product when I was a junior associate, one of the problems with the practice of law is that it's a very challenging environment, and no one likes to put up their hand and say, I don't know this, and including when you're a junior attorney, when you shouldn't know very much. So it's a very difficult environment to learn sometimes, but I find that with practical law, if you were a junior attorney, you could sit there and realize you don't know the answer to something and then just go back to your office, look it up, and you don't even need to put up your hand and say, I don't know this, and which not a lot of people aren't comfortable doing. These partners at these big firms or senior attorneys at in-house departments, one of their primary tasks is junior people coming into their office, knocking on the door and asking questions and then answering the question. But that's not a very efficient use of their resources. I've heard through the grapevine that there is actually a law firm in New York they have a subscription to Practical Law, and their new rule is you cannot go in and ask a partner a question if that answer is on Practical Law. If you come in and ask a partner a question and that partner turns around and looks on Practical Law and the answer is there, you've wasted their time, really, because they're paying for that subscription. And even if there's nothing on Practical Law that they need, which is highly unlikely, at the very least, their junior people it's a teaching tool for their juniors, and that will free up their time to either work on more transactions in the same amount of time and generate more revenue, or in the best case scenario, go home a little bit earlier at night and be a little bit more rested and become more efficient. So.